Welcome to War Bios, the podcast that delves into the intricacies of military history's most pivotal conflicts. I'm your host, General Biography, and today we're going to explore one of the most fascinating battles in medieval history, the Battle of Orleans. This epic siege, which lasted from 1428 to 1429, was a turning point in the 100 Years' War between France and England, and its outcome would have far-reaching consequences for the fate of Western Europe. As we set the stage for this dramatic confrontation, let's begin by examining the historical background that led to the Battle of Orleans. In the early 15th century, the 100 Years' War had been raging for nearly a century, with both sides suffering heavy losses and significant territorial gains and losses. The war had also led to a series of alliances and rivalries between the French nobles, the Burgundians, and the English, which would play a crucial role in the outcome of the battle. In 1427, the English army, led by the Earl of Suffolk, began a campaign to conquer the Loire Valley, a strategic region that controlled access to the French capital, Paris. The English had already gained control of large swaths of northern France, including Normandy and Maine, and were determined to push further into the heart of France. The city of Orleans, situated on the banks of the Loire River, was a crucial stronghold for the French. Its strategic location made it an essential hub for trade and commerce, and its well-fortified walls and defenses had been built over centuries to protect against siege engines and enemy attacks. The city's governor, Jean de Dunois, also known as the Bastard of Orleans, was a seasoned military leader who had defended the city against previous English attacks. As the English army approached Orleans in October 1428, the French defenders were preparing for a long and brutal siege. The city's walls had been reinforced with additional fortifications, including the Bastille de les Tourelles, a fortified gatehouse that controlled access to the city. The defenders had also stockpiled food and supplies, knowing that a prolonged siege was likely. Meanwhile, the French king, Charles VII, was struggling to assert his authority over the warring factions within France. His inability to respond effectively to the English threat had led to a series of disastrous defeats, including the loss of Normandy and Maine. The king's lack of leadership would have far-reaching consequences for the fate of Orleans and the kingdom. Another crucial factor that contributed to the siege was the influence of Joan of Arc, the young peasant woman from Domremy who would become a legendary figure in French history. In the spring of 1428, Joan had begun to experience visions and hear voices, which she believed were messages from God, urging her to drive the English out of France and crown Charles VII as the rightful king. Although her role was still unknown to the French defenders, Joan's arrival on the scene would prove to be a game-changer in the Battle of Orleans. The historical context of the Battle of Orleans is complex and multifaceted, involving a delicate balance of power, strategic calculations, and personal motivations. The city's location, situated at the crossroads of the Loire Valley, made it a vital prize for both the English and the French. As we've seen, the origins of the Battle of Orleans are deeply rooted in the intricate web of alliances, rivalries, and power struggles that characterized medieval Europe. The fate of the city, the kingdom, and Western Europe hangs in the balance. As we delve into the heart of the battle, it becomes clear that the period from 1428 to 1429 was a time of great heroism, strategic brilliance, and luck. The city of Orleans, with its well-fortified walls and defenses, had been preparing for a long and brutal siege. The French defenders, led by Jean de Dunois, the Bastard of Orleans, were determined to hold out against the English army, which was commanded by the Earl of Suffolk. The English army, with its superior numbers and firepower, began the siege in October 1428. They launched a series of attacks on the city's walls, using catapults, trebuchets, and other siege engines to try and breach the defenses. However, the French defenders were well prepared and managed to repel each attack, inflicting significant casualties on the English. As the siege dragged on, the French defenders began to suffer from a lack of food and supplies. The city's stockpiles were dwindling, and the inhabitants were starting to feel the effects of hunger and fatigue. It was during this time of crisis that Joan of Arc, the young peasant woman from Domremy, arrived on the scene. Joan, who had been experiencing visions and hearing voices, believed that she had a divine mission to drive the English out of France and crown Charles VII as the rightful king. she traveled to the city of Vaucouleurs, where she met with Robert de Baudricourt, the garrison commander, and persuaded him to provide her with an escort to take her to the French court at Chinon. After meeting with Charles VII, Joan convinced him to allow her to lead a relief mission to Orléans. She set out on April 27, 1429, with a small army of soldiers and a convoy of supplies. As they approached the city, they were met with fierce resistance from the English, but Joan's bravery and tactical genius helped to inspire the French troops, and they managed to break through the English lines. The arrival of Joan and the relief mission marked a turning point in the siege. The French defenders, who had been on the brink of collapse, were revitalized by her presence and the supplies she brought. They launched a series of counterattacks against the English, using innovative tactics such as sorties and ambushes to exploit the weaknesses in the English lines. One notable example of Joan's tactical brilliance was the capture of the Les Tourelles fortress, which controlled access to the city. On May 7, 1429, Joan led a small group of soldiers in a daring attack on the fortress, using a combination of stealth and surprise to overcome the English defenders. The capture of Les Tourelles was a significant blow to the English, as it allowed the French to regain control of the city's defenses and ultimately forced the English to lift the siege. The lifting of the siege on May 8, 1429 marked a major victory for the French and a significant turning point in the 100 Years' War. The English army, which had been weakened by the prolonged siege and the loss of key strongholds, was forced to retreat from the Loire Valley. The French, on the other hand, were galvanized by their victory, and they went on to achieve a series of stunning successes, including the capture of the city of Patay and the defeat of the English army at the Battle of Formigny. As we reflect on this pivotal moment in history, it's clear that the period from 1428 to 1429 was a time of great heroism and strategic brilliance. The bravery and determination of the French defenders, combined with the tactical genius of Joan of Arc, ultimately led to the defeat of the English army and the liberation of the city of Orleans. The lifting of the siege on May 8, 1429, marked a significant shift in momentum for the French. The English army, weakened by the prolonged siege and the loss of key strongholds, was forced to retreat from the Loire Valley. The French, on the other hand, were galvanized by their victory, and they went on to achieve a series of stunning successes. One of the most significant consequences of the Battle of Orleans was the coronation of Charles VII as King of France. On July 17, 1429, Charles VII was crowned at the Cathedral of Reims with Joan of Arc in attendance. This event marked a major milestone in the war, as it legitimized Charles's claim to the throne and provided a much-needed boost to French morale. The coronation also marked the beginning of a new phase in the war, as the French launched a series of campaigns to expel the English from French territory. The French army, now confident and motivated, achieved a string of victories, including the capture of the city of Patay and the defeat of the English army at the Battle of Formigny. As the French continued to push the English back, Joan of Arc remained a key figure in the war effort. She led several successful campaigns, including the siege of La Chalité-sur-Loire, and played a crucial role in the capture of the city of Compiègne. However, her success was short-lived, as she was captured by the Burgundians on May 2, 1430, while leading an attack on the town of Compiègne. Joan's capture marked a significant turning point in her story, as she was eventually sold to the English and put on trial for heresy and witchcraft. The trial, which took place in 1431, was a sham, with the outcome predetermined by the English. Joan was found guilty and sentenced to death, and she was burned at the stake on May 30, 1331. Despite her tragic end, Joan of Arc's legacy lived on, and she became a legendary figure in French history. Her bravery, determination, and unwavering commitment to her cause inspired generations of French people, and she remains one of the most iconic figures in French history. As we reflect on the aftermath of the Battle of Orleans, it's clear that this pivotal moment in history had far-reaching consequences. The French victory marked a turning point in the 100 Years' War, as it gave the French the momentum they needed to eventually expel the English from French territory. The coronation of Charles VII and the subsequent campaigns led by Joan of Arc and other French leaders ultimately led to the signing of the Treaty of Picquigny in 1456, which brought an end to the war. In conclusion, the Battle of Orleans was a pivotal moment in the Hundred Years' War, marking a turning point in the conflict and paving the way for the eventual French victory. The bravery and determination of Joan of Arc, combined with the strategic brilliance of the French leaders, ultimately led to the defeat of the English army and the liberation of France from foreign occupation. As the French historian Georges Duby once said, the Hundred Years' War was a conflict that shaped the destiny of two nations, and its legacy can still be felt today. That's all for today's War Bios. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, I'm General Biography reminding you to keep marching toward victory.